Good evening, everybody, and welcome to my esteemed guest back for a second part, Valerie Ross. How are you?
I'm well. How about you, Alex?
I'm good, recovering from a very stressful day traveling. But we're here, and apologies to everyone for the late starting of this. I didn't want to clash with Mark and Claire, who were just live on Blown for Good, so we pushed this back a little bit so that we didn't send people from their stream to us. So we just wanted to be kind. So yeah, welcome. We are going to be talking about OSA, which was formerly known as the Guardian's Office, and Scientology as a whole, and just how compartmentalized it is in Scientology. For those of you who haven't seen the first video that I did with Val, go and check it out on my channel. I will put a link to it in the description after the live stream. We talk about Val's really interesting story of working in the Guardian's Office and being a part of the Snow White project. So go and check it out. But if you haven't, that's absolutely fine. We're going to be talking about kind of other stuff today, so it's not like a prerequisite. But Val, where do you want to start? You want to start maybe with Scientology as a whole, and how you know, if you're in Scientology, someone might do something and they might be really close to you and you won't know because there's a, you know, you don't talk to people about stuff openly in Scientology, and it's all very hush hush. You know, do you want to start maybe about your time at ASHO in LA?
Right. Let's start there. If anybody wants to know, like, all the background, my website is at ValerieRossBooks.com, and I have pinned to the top. It's, if you're new to my story, you can go there, figure out all the background. I'm not going to go into all that. So, but when I was at ASHO, I was the senior briefing course supervisor. So in the real world, that meant I was kind of near the top of the heap. As you know, I wasn't the very top, but I was high enough up that I should have known a lot. And I was kind of in charge of a bunch of people. However, just as an example, I know that Mike Rinder came into ASHO one time while I was there. I know that because he posted that on his blog, not because I saw him. Yeah. However, Mike Rinder was doing a mission regarding the briefing course when he came to ASHO. So I was the senior briefing course supervisor when he came to ASHO, and he was in the same org at the same time I was. However, I was a senior briefing course supervisor of ASHO Day. He was doing a mission for ASHO Foundation. Right. The hours for ASHO Day are the daytime hours. The foundation hours start at 6 p.m. and go on. We were all there more than just the hours for whatever our organization was scheduled. However, I was never introduced to Mike Rinder, or I couldn't say whether or not I saw him because it wasn't my job to know him. And it was that simple. I didn't know people. It wasn't my job to know. And I mean that dead seriously. I didn't know the cook in the galley, even though he gave me food every day, because that was not my job. And I'm embarrassed because I'm not that kind of a person. I mean, if somebody waits up in the grocery store, I know their name.
Yeah, but it's not something to be embarrassed about, because that's, you know, Scientology makes you a very different person, right? And I always look at Scientology me as not the real me, because you're thinking in a different way, you're behaving in a different way. You don't realize it at the time, but it is a different person, and you do things that you wouldn't do nowadays. You do things in a different way, and so on. And you know, this compartmentalization is across the board. You know, there are people who worked at ASHO. I think Nora was saying this, Nora Ames, on one of her live streams, that she there was someone else working at the org at the same time she was for years, and they just never even crossed paths because they're on different floors, even though they're in the same building. And it's the same with me at London org. Like, there were people who were auditors, for example, that I would see at the staff muster in the mornings, but that's it. I had no idea what they were doing. I could see their job title, their post on the org board, but beyond that, they just, you know, it's so siloed, right?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact, like you said, at muster, we'd all have to be there for muster every morning, every lunchtime, every evening, which really cut into eating time. A lot of times I didn't eat breakfast or lunch or dinner because the way they scheduled muster was really weird. They would schedule it so you had to eat breakfast and then get to muster. But so if you were late for breakfast, because we didn't have a bus back then, so if you couldn't figure out how to get there on time for breakfast, you didn't get to eat breakfast. So but you had to be at muster. You didn't have a choice about that. Same way
Yeah.
with lunch. Lunch before muster, and then dinner before muster. Which it would have made a lot more sense to go to muster and then go to dinner because it's the end of the day. But no, you had to go to dinner and then muster. And
Wow.
then so they 3 times a day they had to call roll. All of us that were there, we had to say yes. So I heard those people's names 3 times a day, and their names were on the org board. But if you had said, what does some random person's their name, I would have said, oh, the org board says they blah, blah, blah. Other than that, I probably couldn't have told you the majority of their job
Yeah.
unless I personally had to interact with them on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
There were a
Absolutely.
few, yeah, a very, very few people who I did interact with because I sat at the same table with them in the galley.
Wow. Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
you only really need to engage or interact with the people that you need to do your job, right? You know, when I was in Div 6 selling books, obviously I would interact with lots of people across the org, especially with bookathons when we tried to get people in from across the org to come out book selling. But other than that, like, there wasn't much opportunity for me to go and sit down and have a chat with one of the course supervisors or someone in HCO or, you know, the Purif IC, because it's just a completely different job and you're so focused on getting your job done that you literally don't have the time because you've got to focus on getting your stats up. So you only speak to the people that you need to get your job done, right?
Yes. And as a matter of fact, a person asked me several years ago, he goes, so what is it that you did all day? And I sat there a minute and went, busy work.
Yeah, a lot of busy work. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I mean, you were so focused on getting your job done, but if you were to sit there and describe
Yeah.
your job was busy work. That's all it was, all day long.
Yeah. Danielle
And
Chamberlain
that's
here
the
is in the chat.
horrible part about it.
Yeah, no, 100%. I just wanted to bring this up. Danielle Chamberlain's in the chat. She's saying, working for the AG in the UK Guardian's office, I heard and saw quite a lot and was under strict instructions not to pass on any of the information I was privy to. Sometimes the door would shut and hushed tones behind the door. Then a few weeks later, I would be typing up confidential reports to Jane Kember, but everything was compartmentalized and it was only in a need to know basis. That's exactly it.
Very, very true. Yes. I mean, when in the GO, I could tell you who my senior was. We didn't have an org board on the wall there. I couldn't even tell you who worked in the basement of the manor. I could tell you who my senior was, and I could tell you who her senior was because her senior was Mary Sue Hubbard. And that was all I could tell you.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would see a person and I would go, I think they work for the GO. I couldn't even tell you their name most of the time. People will go, hey, did you know my mom? You got me.
Yeah.
I may have seen that person, but I couldn't tell you if that person worked for the GO. I can't tell you if it was your mom. I can't even, as half the time, I couldn't even tell you if it was that person's name. And what I learned, no, I didn't pass that on. And yeah, well, as long as we're jumping into the GO, yeah. When I was planted in the FBI, I was told to get a document. You go to this file, go in the file room, find this document. It's dated this date. It's from this person. It's to this person. And this is subject line. They knew all this stuff already. Don't ask me how they got it. And I got the document. I did not read it. I didn't even consider I would be. I didn't even think about reading it. It was not not something I would think about doing. That's just not something you did. You didn't read the documents. They told me to get it. I pulled it out of the file. I took it and I gave it to Mary Sue, period, the end. And I would never have considered reading it. Same way. She'd go to the newsstand, pull all the newspapers. There's going to be an in theta article. I didn't ask what the article was. I'm just like, oh, okay. I'd grab the newspapers and take them back to her. So you compartmentalize yourself too. If somebody starts talking about something you're not supposed to hear, you walk away.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that works right through to people who had nothing to do with the Guardian's office, which obviously evolved that we now know as OSA. Like even people coming into the org for tours, right? That I would try and sell a book to or whatever. They would ask questions or say things and be attacking of Scientology. And you just kind of, in your mind, you just shut it down and you go, I'm not going to listen to what this person's going to say because you know it's N theta. So in your own mind, you condition yourself to only receive information from certain sources. And when it comes to your job, like with the geo, that like people need to understand that the way OSA, formerly the GEO, works is it's an intelligence organization, right? If you think about the CIA, MI5, MI6, all of these government intelligence agencies, if you work for them, you're going to know your job and you're going to know your senior and whatever, but you're not going to know what the person sitting next to you is doing. You're not going to know everything about the case because it's the less you know the better, because it's reducing the risk of leaks or whatever. So you only know what you need to know to do your job, and then you pass that information on. And OSA is set up in exactly the same way, as evidenced by you saying you worked in the same office as these other people and you wouldn't even know, because in order for you to do your job, you go and get the information and that's it. You hand it in. That's your job. The more you know, the more at risk you are of potential punishments and stuff, because then you become a risk to Scientology. So they keep a closer eye on you. So it actually works in your favor to not ask too many questions.
Hubbard was convinced that everybody was our enemy too. So it was twice as secretive as it should have been. And he made everybody be paranoid of everybody else. The higher up I got in Scientology, the less I trusted anyone. My husband, my mother-in-law, I certainly wouldn't trust. You don't have friends in Scientology because your friend has to protect themselves as well. Your friend, if you were to say a word that they thought was bad, they'd have to turn you in. So you learn to protect yourself by not saying anything to anybody.
Yeah. And the reason
OT3. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the reason that happens, that like the reason you have to turn people in is because if you don't, then you get in trouble, right? Like if you were witness to someone doing something and you didn't write a knowledge report on them, and then it's later found out that you were there and you saw it and you didn't report on it, you would get in trouble to the same degree that the person who did whatever it was would get in trouble too. So you have to report everything just to save yourself. So you end up just not telling anyone anything.
Yes. And okay, we'll get into like even auditing, OT3. I was telling my daughter about this just a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, okay, so they gave me a briefcase and then they handcuff it to me. And then I have to go lock myself in a room. And she's like, whoa, back up. What the fuck? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, no. And I said, yes. And she says, okay, so you do this. And then I kind of explained OT3 to her. And I said, oh, you're going to get pneumonia too, by the way. And then I explained. And then she says, so what did you tell people about? And I said, I didn't tell anyone about it. And she says, not even people who had done it. And I'm like, oh, no, you don't talk about it. Whether or not anyone else has done OT3, you don't talk about it. You don't talk about grade 0 to anybody else. You don't talk about, you could say, oh, I had all these wins, and you'd be very non-specific about what your wins were. And that's the closest you get to talking about your auditing. That's how compartmentalized Scientology is.
Yeah.
And oh, you know, you get to the point where you're like living so compartmentalized that I know for a fact that I hurt people just by my actions. I know that I was told to do things that hurt people. However, I was living my own hell. And I probably wouldn't recognize the people I hurt or even remember their names because I was so focused on my hell that all I wanted to do is get through my hell. And I think the people I hurt were probably in the same position.
Yeah. And you also have to think the reason for it as well. Like, I can't speak for you, but most people in Scientology do things because they think the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics. So whether or not you're aware that what you're doing might be hurting someone at the time, you 100% believe that doing so is a necessary evil, that ultimately it's going to help mankind. You may not have even been aware at the time that you were going to hurt somebody because you thought you were helping them with Scientology. That doesn't, of course, excuse it, but it allows people to understand the mindset that you were in at the time, that, you know, A, you thought you were helping, and B, if you didn't comply, you would get in a lot of trouble. So it's like either you hurt somebody or you get hurt twice as bad. And why would you want to do that when you know that doing this thing that's hurtful to someone is for the best for mankind? And it's, you know, blah, like however it's sold to you, it's disgusting,
Right.
but it's a control technique.
It certainly is. And when you're in that mindset, it's very similar to an abused woman. And when I'm in I've seen it happen when other women are having the same problem, like out of Scientology. And you can't walk away from it because my mind was convinced that it was my fault. So, I mean, I didn't even mean to go there, but I mean, you know, you get Scientology convinces you that you're the victim, but you can't act like a victim because Scientology won't let you be a victim. So it's, you know, you are totally responsible for the condition you are in. Even if somebody's been beating you, it's your fault. My ex-mother-in-law actually said that to her daughter. Well, she must have done something to deserve it after she watched my ex-husband beat me up.
It's yeah. Disgusting. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
It really is. But that's the thing is, you know, your mother-in-law, I don't know, but probably at the time when she said that was fully applying Scientology. That's because she fully believed that the reason was because you pulled it in, because that's what you've been programmed to believe. So she probably didn't say that knowing that it would upset you or hurt you or whatever, or intentionally cause you harm. Probably it was actually because she's trying to help you by applying Scientology ethics. If you do your OWs, then it will solve the problem.
Right. She was on OT7 at the time, so she probably needed to say that to keep herself sane. Yeah. Yeah, see, there we go. She didn't, yeah. Another person who unintentionally hurt me, not because of her, but because of Scientology. You're right. Thank you.
And it's used as a control technique. Like, this is, if you look at like what undermines all of this, like why, for example, can you not talk about OT3? Why can you not talk about grade 0, whatever your bridge progress is? It's because it it's a control tactic. The more people speak about stuff, the more they're going to find things they agree and don't agree with and talk about how absurd it is and so on. So by telling you can't speak to anybody about it, otherwise you'll get punished or you'll, whatever, you get sec checked, OW write-ups, you get pneumonia or whatever the threat is. It's all to control you so that you have to follow the party line. And it's just disgusting the way that the whole system is built around control, and you don't even know it. You're enforcing it on yourself,
Right.
not because you think you're
Yeah.
allowing them to control you, but because you think that's the right thing to do.
They call it the bridge to total freedom, but the higher up you get, the more controlled you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Daniel
It's
Chamberlain's got
kind of
another.
scary.
Yeah, Daniel Chambers got another great point here. Val, I hope you can give yourself grace. We were all coerced and indoctrinated to help clear the planet, and it's best for the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I know. Yeah. Another thing Alex and I have been talking about is even when I left GO and I went to Bellevue. If you haven't read my story, sorry, I'm not going to go into the whole details. But after the GO asked me to leave because my ex-husband did some really horrendous things and it was bad PR for the GO.
Which is ridiculous. Sorry to interrupt, but like that, just that sentence alone, right, is that happened to you and it was horrible and you've got to leave because it might make us look bad. No compassion or kindness or understanding. Huh. Sorry. Carry on.
You need to leave because of what he did to you. And I'm sorry, I just really can't go into that today. But if anybody wants, it's on my website. So Alex will put a link there, I'm sure. But so so I go to Bellevue, Washington. And anybody who knows Amy Scobie's story, and if you don't, go to her place because it's a pretty sad, it's a horrendous story. Well, the person that did that to Amy Scobie happened to be my ex-brother-in-law. And my ex-brother-in-law and my husband and I and his wife lived in the same house. And so they were getting a divorce at the time I was in Bellevue, and it was because of the stuff that happened with Amy Scobie. And we actually went on a drive together in the same car, Amy Scobie and me and my ex-brother-in-law and my husband. So all of us were in the same car together. Amy and I actually became fairly good friends. She was a bit younger than me, but we became fairly good friends in Bellevue. And then, of course, I disappeared to Salt Lake and she stayed in Bellevue and she got in the Sea Org and she got high up in Scientology and then finally got out. But I talked to her recently and we discussed the fact that when we were there, even though my ex-husband's brother and his wife were getting a divorce at the time, I had no clue why. And I knew Amy and I had no clue anything that had happened to her. And Amy had no clue that I was in Sea Org or that I had been in the GO. That was not something any of us talked about, even though we were basically what you would consider friends in Scientology. But that, you just didn't talk about your life. I guess is all I can say. It was pretty darn superficial. My whole time in Scientology. Oh, okay. I'll tell you. This is how superficial you had to be. Okay, when I first got into Scientology, I all of a sudden realized just how superficial I was going to have to be for the rest of my life. That I thought at the time. Somebody said, "So why do you eat with your left hand and write with your right hand?" And I said, "Oh, well, I fell out of a mulberry tree when I was 5 years old, broke my arm, all these bones were poking out, so I was in a cast for 2 years. So I had to learn to write with my right hand, but I still kept eating with my left hand." Pretty simple. I was with a bunch of staff members, and they all looked at me and they went, You should only bring that up in session.
What?
That's a stinking life experience. It's not an engram.
So
Yeah.
that's the thing. You can't talk about something that happened to you in the past because there's a potential that's related to your case, and that's something that you should only deal with your auditor. Like, and that's the thing is, it's not a violation of policy to talk about something that happened in your life, but there's a possibility it could be interpreted in a way that is against policy. So these people panicked and said you shouldn't talk about it. That's insane.
That is, it is insane, but it was kind of like, oh my, you know, you learn early on to keep your mouth shut about everything.
And I don't know if you had this experience, but when I was in Scientology, and still now to this day, very much so, I'm a big overthinker, and even more so in Scientology. When I was talking to someone about whatever it may be, always in the back of my mind, I was questioning before I said anything, could this be interpreted in a different way? So you're very careful about the words that you choose, because you're like, I don't want to say something that could be interpreted as meaning I'm anti-Scientology or the tech didn't work or whatever. And it might be something really simple and stupid, but you condition yourself to think before you speak because you don't want to end up getting in trouble. Were you similar when you were in?
When I was in, before I got in, I blurted whatever I wanted. I learned not to blurt in Scientology. And I had to learn how to blurt again. I mean, I am much more cautious with the way I speak these days, which is not necessarily good. I mean, sometimes you should just, and I'm getting old enough that I don't really care anymore. But, you know, it's like, after I got out of Scientology, it took a long time for me to even be willing to say anything, because the way I got out, I just kind of went slam from the Scientology world into the WOG world, and I didn't know anyone or have any friends, and I just went into a job I didn't know anything about. I pretty much kept my mouth shut for the first 6 months. I just, sure, how do I do that? Okay, what do I do? Where do I put this? That kind of questions. So I had to learn how to actually just have a communication after I got out of Scientology.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And like, you condition yourselves as well to like to not ask too many questions. From my experience, like, I remember there was this one time that these TTCers, for those watching who don't know what that is, that's people who are training to be auditors on a training course. They were over at Flag training on the Golden Age Tech 2 evolution, and they were coming back to London Org, probably for a visa thing, and then they flew back again. But every time they flew over from Flag, they would have PC folders and different documents and files in their hand luggage that they would take with them. And it was names of people who were never at London Org, like people who were never anything to do with London. And I was like, why have we got this person's folder, or why have we got that document or whatever? And it was very quickly established, don't ask that question, because it's something to do with OSA. Now, I realize now, knowing how Scientology works and, investigating and so on, that it's probably something to do with a legal case or something going on in America where they needed to suddenly not have these folders, because if there was a subpoena or the police raided or whatever, these would be damning documents. So it'd be very convenient if they were suddenly lost down a sofa at London Org, which is a whole different country, different jurisdiction, and so on. So my suspicion is that these auditors were told, here are some files, take them with you to London. That's it. No questions asked. And they complied. They didn't know what they were doing. But because I just asked a question, it was like, I was like, why do we have these folders? And the answer was, we have these folders. Yeah, but why? Yeah, well, we have these folders. Like, stop asking questions, Alex. And like, just asking the question
You don't have
got me
the
in
right
trouble.
to ask that question, Alex.
Yeah. Asking why is just not okay in Scientology.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's well, actually, before I got in Scientology, I was a Mormon, and
Were you?
I
I didn't
asked the
know that.
question. Yes, I was.
Oh wow.
That's one of the things Heber and I had in common. He was raised with Mormon doctrine, even though his family was excommunicated because his dad was a polygamist. So we had that in common. But I left the Mormon Church when I was 14. Big, long story. But anyway, so one of the questions I asked one time is that there's this article of faith that talks about as in Christ all men die, blah 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 blah. Anyway, so I was asking about this article of faith, and all I was that my teacher looked at me, my seminary teacher, and said, "Valerie, you know better than to ask that question."
No.
I'm like, yeah. So it's the same way with the Mormon religion. It's yeah.
And
You know,
how did that translate to when you were in the Guardian's office? Like, for example, in the last video we did, we talked in depth about you infiltrating the FBI and stealing documents for Scientology, and it was, you know, you handed them over to Mary Sue and all of this, but you never read them, like you just mentioned. But how did that like translate? So you were told to go and do this, and you went and did it, and you didn't ask questions. Like, were there times when you were tempted or you wanted to try and slyly ask questions about why you're doing this, or was it just follow orders, you've just got to do this, like internally, you know?
it was just follow orders. I mean,
Mm.
when I was raised a Mormon, you know, you learn to follow orders that way too. So I kind of was more indoctrinated to follow orders, kind of. But I was also raised with a kind of this, you know, you don't peek if you're told not to. You always tell the truth. And if I had been put on a meter, I didn't want to have any dirty needle or have somebody think I had done something wrong. And I was not a good liar. And I'm even after I get trained with the FBI, I could lie better to other people. But for some reason, I couldn't lie to Mary Sue or Diana. I was like, deer in the headlights the minute I saw either of them, because I thought they had these OT powers so they could see through my lies anyway. So I wouldn't dare even consider it. My mind just went, oh, okay. I don't look at this document. Don't look at this document. Don't look at this document. I do really good in doctor's offices too, because I don't try to look at other people's charts or anything, because it's kind of like, it's none of my business. And my husband will say, well, what about this? And I'll go, I don't know. I didn't ask. Aren't you at least a little bit curious? I'm like, it's none of my business. That's why I worked out so well in an attorney's office, I think, because it's like, no, I'm not going to share that with you, and it's none of my business what they do on this side, you know. I guess I really did learn to compartmentalize way too well.
Yeah. And did you ever think, you know, when you mentioned earlier they would tell you go and get this file from this person, it said, you know, this title or date or whatever, like, did you ever think in your mind, how do they know that? Like, how have they got this information, and want to figure out how they know that at all?
Not till recently. When I was doing it, it was just like, of course they know what they want. Yeah, they're OT. They could figure this out. They may have actually gone in without their bodies and looked in these, you know. I don't know. I don't know. I really didn't question how they knew. I just figured that they'd figured this out, and it was all I had to do was just my little piece of the pie. This teeny, teeny, teeny little slice of the pie that had nothing whatsoever to do with anything else. Just give them the piece of paper they wanted. And all I was a little physical body that walked in and acted really cute and sweet.
Yeah. And you had no idea what
really well.
and you had no idea what happened to these files once you handed them over, right?
No, none whatsoever.
No.
I didn't ask.
Yeah. No, go on. Sorry, go on.
No, I just didn't ask. I didn't.
Yeah. And in your mind, did you, I imagine as a Scientologist, I would have justified doing these things because the church knows best. This is the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics. You know that you shouldn't be stealing files from the FBI. You know that you shouldn't be doing this per the law. However, Scientology knows better than the law. And so doing this is actually the right thing to do, right? Is that kind of how it worked in your mind?
I was saving Scientology from SMERSH.
Yeah.
SMERSH was Hubbard's invention. Well, you know, SMERSH was in James Bond before Hubbard came up with it. But SMERSH was Hubbard's, whatever Hubbard wanted SMERSH to be that day, basically. I mean, if you read different OSA policies, SMERSH is different stuff. But SMERSH was like the World Bank. SMERSH was anything that was like he considered bad. Psychs. Then it included medical doctors. Then it, you know, SMERSH was the bad people, all the government agencies, etc.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, you know, of course, the ends justifies the means in that case. And there were actually a lot of GO policies, and their OSA policies now. I've actually seen the OSA pack that said that we will be the law. Don't worry about it. Someday we will actually be the law. You just do what it takes to get this done.
100%. I'm just looking. I've got some OSA policy quotes that I pulled up here. I'm just trying to find one that that's useful that we can bring up. Here we go. So this is Founding Church Policy Letter of 6th of October 1958. Who can be processed and who can be trained? And this is just a quote from that I've pulled from the policy. Purpose of Hubbard Guidance Center is to improve ability and intelligence, blah, blah. This is without regard to law. This regulation is our own law, right? If we have trouble, remember, we make our own trouble. Only we make our trouble. You know, it talks here about, these are just different quotes from kind of about investigations and so on. The object of this department, this is the Department of Government Affairs, is to broaden the impact of Scientology upon governments and Scientology better and more forceful, right? In the face of danger from governments, of course, there are only two errors one can make. A, do nothing, and B, defend, right? The whole purpose is derail the offend game with a feint attack upon the most vulnerable point, which can be disclosed by enemy ranks. Make enough threat or clamor to cause the enemy to quail. Don't try and make money out of it. Make every attack by us also sell Scientology and win, right? Saying here, always find or manufacture enough threat against them to cause them to sue for peace. Don't ever defend,
Find
always
or
attack.
Find
Sorry,
or
say again.
manufacture.
Yeah.
Find or manufacture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you can't find any, make it up.
Yeah. And
yeah.
these are all things that you wouldn't have, I don't know if you read this policy or not, but like, it wasn't part of your role, even though you were in the Guardian's office and you were getting information from the FBI. Your job wasn't to attack people. So your job wasn't to manufacture stuff like this. So you wouldn't have known anything about anyone who was doing that, even if they were in the GO in the same office as you at the same time, right?
That is correct. The closest I came to spying on people is sometimes I would be asked to go to lunch at a restaurant where there would be certain people there. And I would pretend to be reading a book sitting next to the table, and I would have to let them, Mary Sue and Diana, know what was said at that meeting.
Right.
That's the closest I came to spying. Tori did a lot more spying than I did.
Yeah.
Tori Christman would be one to talk to about compartmentalizing.
I love Tori. Tori is so lovely. I met her when I was in LA earlier this year. She is such a lovely person, and we've been trying to schedule a stream together at some point. We need to do that for sure. But I was going to ask, how many people would you estimate were in the Guardian's office at the time you were there, like infiltrating the FBI, roughly?
I really, no clue. I mean, the closest I can even guess as far as in LA is we had a meeting one time where there were 20 people. That's that's the most people I saw that were in LA at the time. And, but I don't think that's anywhere near the number of people that were there. I
Okay.
we were we didn't talk to each other.
Yeah.
It's it was really, especially with everything going down, it was pretty darn hush hush, especially after the raids.
So of those 20 people, how many would you estimate you knew what their jobs were or what they were doing?
3. That includes me.
And
And
those
I
two
didn't
were
know.
like your senior and Mary Sue, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I didn't know everything they were doing. I knew what the part of what I did that they did too. That's all I knew. And I just assumed that everybody else did exactly what I did. I know
Yeah.
they didn't. I know they didn't. But at the time, that's it's just kind of like, well, they're in other buildings doing the same thing I'm doing.
Yeah.
That's probably the only way I could keep myself sane. If I had even considered that, well, there's a lot of people out there and these policies all say you have to do this and this and this, I probably would have really not been very sane.
Yeah. That's the reason I asked that question, is because even though you were in the GO at the same time as lots of other people, you only knew of 20 people. Of those, you only spoke to 3, and you had your job, you did your job, but so you were an integral part of this campaign to infiltrate the FBI, and they couldn't have done it without you, but you had no idea that that's what was happening. You were just doing your job, handing over the documents, and you had no idea what happened to it. When you sat next to someone, when you were asked to go sit next to them at the restaurant and take notes on what they were talking about, you didn't perhaps know who they were or why you needed to do that or what was going to be done with those notes. You were just told to go
Oh,
and make notes.
yeah. Oh, as a matter of fact, I think I heard or was told afterwards that Heber was actually part of the GO, and Heber was as close to a friend as I had back in those days. Heber and Yvonne were, so I guess I knew Heber too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
But he was like the kind of the figurehead, right? He was the president of the
right,
Church of Scientology. He was more of a PR front facing role,
yeah.
right?
Legally, Heber is still the president of the Church of Scientology. If you
Wow.
look at the Church of Scientology International, he's listed on their incorporation papers today with the Secretary of State as the president of the Church of Scientology.
And this is
Even
actually a
though,
good point. When I was in Scientology, firstly, I'd never even heard of Heber, had no idea who Heber Jench was at all. And we always thought of Dave Miscavige as chairman of the board, right? I didn't know who else was on the board. Who are the board members?
nobody.
Like, I don't know. You just know David Miscavige, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Legally, he is still the figurehead,
Wow.
even though he's probably in a nursing home somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you knew Heber, and obviously that's quite a very high up role, president of the church, he did media interviews, and he was the face of Scientology publicly for a very long time. So
Right.
you knew that he was involved in that. What, like, did you know anything about what he was doing for the church, like what he was involved in at all?
Oh, no, I would have meals with him and Yvonne occasionally at at Yvonne's desk. I mean, not we didn't go out and dine in restaurants. We would sit at Yvonne's desk and talk, and we talked more about Yvonne's children and that kind of stuff than we did anything else. We didn't talk about what either of them were really doing. I knew more about what Yvonne was doing simply because people were in and out of her office every second of the meal. But Heber was, if we talked about what he was doing, it was he was going to sing at this place, or he was, it was more PR than anything. That's all. all I knew about Heber's stuff. He was like, I'm going to sing here. I performed here. I did this. And I knew that he was in an extra in Paint Your Wagons. Yeah, that movie and stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff I knew about Heber. And then we talked about growing up as a polygamist and that kind of stuff. So that's, Though I didn't, the closest I came to going, oh my gosh, Heber is a lot deeper than I thought he was, is when he came over with a bunch of my folders and said, you got a hibachi here on your balcony, right? And I said, yeah. And he says, we're going to burn these. It's like, oh.
Wow.
Okay.
What, trying to protect you?
Yeah. That was done. I think I've seen people write about it a couple of times way back in 2011 or so, when I was on ESMB for 20 seconds. That people wrote about, 2 or 3 other people wrote about how they had folders burned. So that was, or other people wrote about how they'd go through and redact, and to redact back then, you just took an X-Acto knife and cut out pieces of the folder, big chunks of it. So yeah, but a lot of times things just disappeared.
Yeah, and you learn not to ask questions, because if you ask questions, then you get in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How much about? Sorry, no, go on.
I think that's why they still stay with paper. It's easier for paper to disappear than computer stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easy for folders to go missing or disappear. Like I mentioned, these physical folders that were sent from Flag to London for a reason unknown, it's so that they can legitimately say we don't have that folder, because the US church doesn't have that folder. It's actually in possession of the UK church. But it's easy to lose paper files, even though it's a paper trail, which is obviously really bad if you're committing criminal acts. It's easy to lose that. Whereas if you have a computer record and servers and such, it's easier to mine. But I was going to ask, so you were in the Guardian's office, right? How much did you know about fair game at the time? What was your exposure to it?
Everybody knew about fair game. I mean, that's obviously a generalization, but I'm trying to remember why I knew about it. Honestly, I got to kind of get this in my head, because it was one of those things where it's like, anybody I talked to knew that if you did something bad to Scientology, they were going to come after you. And I'm trying to think why everybody knew that, because it's not like, but that was something we all talked about. That was not compartmentalized. That was, and so I'm trying to think when I first witnessed fair game or heard of fair game. I'm fairly certain it was when I was still in Salt Lake, and I only stayed in Salt Lake maybe 3 months. The first 3 months that I was in Scientology, I think, is when I first heard about fair game. I don't know if I read a policy on one of the intro courses, or if somebody talked about it, but I knew basically from the very start that if you spoke bad about Scientology, you were in trouble. That you better, maybe it was like even keeping Scientology working. It was like, you fought for Scientology basically for the rest of your life. You were in this for your life, and you fought against anyone who didn't like Scientology, and fair game was okay.
Yeah, with us or against us, die in the attempt, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think I read the fair game policy while I was still in Salt Lake.
Right.
I can't guarantee that. It's been a couple of years. Like it was in 75.
Of course. But what I'm getting to here is the fair game is the responsibility of OSA, the Guardian's office, right? And you worked for the Guardian's office. What was your exposure to what fair game was going on when you were in the Guardian's office? Even if you didn't take part in doing any yourself, did you have any awareness of what was being done to fair game people at the time you were in the GO?
Not while I was in the GO, no. Actually, I think I actually witnessed some when I was at ASHO. I heard whispers of some when I was at ASHO by students who talked about people who had left.
Hmm.
Students told me about it. When I was in the GO, I was really kept in the dark about it. I mean, as far as I knew, when I was in the GO, everybody was good to everybody. I still had the fear. But for some reason, and I compartmentalizing in my own mind, we were the good guys. We were just protecting Scientology. We weren't going to do anything bad to anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what I'm getting at here is it's entirely possible that someone who is in the Guardian's office at the same time as you, perhaps even in the same office, right? Maybe one of those 20 people that was at this meeting could have been actively fair gaming someone in a really horrible way and doing horrible things to this person, smear campaigns and the lot. That could have been happening. And you
It's
wouldn't have
entirely probable.
yeah. And you had no idea about it at all, even though you shared an office with this person.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They could have been out picking up hookers and shooting people and doing bad things to people at night, and I wouldn't have known about it.
Yeah. And if you were to ask about it, you would get in trouble.
This is correct. I would never have considered saying, so what's your, when you're in an office, you walk in, you go, hi, what do you do here? Oh, okay, cool. What does that mean? If you were to walk into Scientology and go, what's your job? You get in trouble just for asking that. 80% of the time, unless you were supposed to know what their job was, you don't ask. You're told this is the person you can talk to, and this person will help you with your job.
Yeah. You follow orders because you think that following orders is the best for the planet, but you also think that if you don't follow orders or if you ask too many questions, stop with the backflash. Stop asking questions.
Right.
That I got that all the time. Like I would get orders from Charlie, my senior, be like, go and do this. And I would be like, yeah, but why? Would it not make more sense to do it like this? And he'd be like, just stop with the backflash. Just do what you're told. And you just go, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's you do it. It's my way or the highway, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you learn not to ask questions, but you also learn not to ask questions even about their job. Even though you're supposed to know the whole org board, you don't know the org board because you don't know what anybody on that org board's doing unless you've done their job. And even then, you don't know that they're doing the job the same way you did the job.
Yeah, it might say legal aid, but, in actual fact, that person's going around hiring private investigators to follow someone. Like, you know what their title is. You can look it up on the org board, but you don't know what that actually means and what they're actually doing.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So, Val, I want to, because we're approaching an hour, and I want to get some questions that people I've been starring to me going along. So before we do that, I want to ask a question, which is, what, from your experience in the Guardian's office, now known as OSA, what do you want people to know about or understand about the way it all works? Someone who's never been in Scientology, that is obviously aware of Scientology fair gaming people and has maybe, read a book or seen a documentary, aware of what they do, but doesn't understand the intricacies of how it all works. What do you want to get across to those people? What do you want them to understand about how it works?
I think that the people need to understand that even the person at the very top, I don't think, Mary Sue was at the very top when I was in there. So that was L. Ron Hubbard's wife. And I think even Mary Sue didn't have any autonomy. That Mary Sue was operating under orders from L. Ron Hubbard. Even though she was in charge of it, she's the one that ended up taking the bullet and going to prison for Hubbard. I believe that she had no choice in what she did, that she did as she was told from above. And I think that anyone who is in OSA these days is doing as they're told from the very, 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 very top of Scientology. They're following orders and they're doing their very best to do what they're told to keep themselves alive. And they also don't have any clue what's going on half the time, no matter what's going on. And they're just kind of like throwing things at the wall and hoping they stick, because they just want to protect themselves more than anything, because it's a high pressure, a thankless job, and you can get demoted with a blink of an eye in that position. And yeah, there's a whole lot of collateral damage to people that you probably even aren't aware that happened. And I believe that from where I was in the GO all the way up to the top, that Mary Sue didn't have anywhere near the control I believe she had, and that anyone who's in the GO now doesn't have the control they wish they had.
Yeah. And I think it's really important as well that for people leaving Scientology, especially in positions in the GO or OSA or wherever you are, you don't have to speak out publicly and become a critic or start a YouTube channel or write a book or whatever. But it's really important that you do what you can to make amends for the things that you've done. And I think, you know, for example, you starting your website, you doing interviews with various people, coming on my channel and saying, hey, I was a part of this, I did this. And being accountable for it is really, really important, because there are so many people who were doing even worse things that have left, that have done absolutely nothing about it and stay completely silent. And so anybody who makes even the smallest effort to try and raise awareness or put things right, even if it's not on a public scale, just something, making a police report or apologizing to the people that you hurt, that I think is really important and deserves a big round of applause and a thanks. You know, you're one of the few people that have put your hands up and said, I did something I shouldn't have done, and now I want to make it right.
Yeah. I don't know all of the people I hurt though, and I hope that people out there expecting apologies. If I hurt you, I'm sorry. I can't tell you that I'd even know your name, and I think that there are other people in my position who could say the same thing. So please don't hold it against people who were like me or higher than me, who don't come to you personally and apologize, because it doesn't mean they don't care that they hurt you.
There's a lot of collateral damage in Scientology, not just in the OSA GEO stuff. Like, anybody who comes into contact with Scientology is going to be harmed in some way, shape, or form, even to different varying degrees. You know, for example, I would sell people books on the streets of London, and in order to do that, I would ask them really personal questions, invade their privacy, and, you know, try and figure out what's ruining their life so that I can sell them the book, because I believe that was the right thing to do. And so there are lots of people who sat down with me and burst into tears, or, you know, were triggered or re-traumatized, telling me something that happened in their past, and maybe they bought the book, maybe they didn't, but that act of doing that is harming that person. And I did a lot of that. And the same for me. I apologize to anyone that I did that to. Some people might still be in Scientology nowadays, and some people have done Scientology and left. And, you know, it doesn't excuse it, but you think you're doing the right thing. You think you're helping them. It's not like anyone sits there and intentionally tries to harm someone. I mean, people do that, of course. You know, David Miscavige beats his staff and so on. But like, the majority of Scientologists don't even recognize that what they're doing is harming people. They think they're helping, right?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Val, let's do some of these questions. All right, if you're ready for it.
I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they're not actually mostly just comments. Ex-witness Vernon here. Comment, Alex. Hello. Hi. SP Crusader Leanie is here saying love Valerie.
Aww.
Danielle Chamberlain again here. Comment, years later, I was always shocked to discover who the plants were, people I'd worked closely with or shared meals with.
Yep.
Witness, yep, it's self-enforcing compliance. Some twisted crap.
Right. Yeah, you enforce yourself.
Yeah. Bok Buddy, we're talking about the bridge earlier. Bok Buddy says there's a troll under that bridge. The bridge to total freedom, that is.
Yes, there is. Big old troll. Well, no, actually, he's not that big.
4'11" troll called Dave Miscavige.
Right.
Daniel Chamberlain again here. It got to such a point where individuals seem to have lost the ability to think for themselves. They're robots, completely and utterly indoctrinated. Yeah.
The higher you get on the bridge, the more indoctrinated you are. I think it's harder to break free once you hit OT8, because then you go. I think people actually get crazier up there. It's a sad state of affairs, but you have to become totally indoctrinated to get that high.
Golden Astro Cat here. Alex, telling people who were in Scientology to make amends is extremely triggering. Okay, I apologize. I didn't mean to trigger anyone by saying that. What I meant, so in Scientology, if you're a suppressive person or you've done wrong, you have to make amends with an amends project or whatever. And what that usually involves is admitting what you've done wrong to the church and making things right so that you can be in Scientology again. And I didn't mean it in that way. I meant make amends in whatever way is right for you as a person, right? Like if you need to come to terms with it and apologize to someone, or whether you want to go and speak out publicly, or whatever it is you do to be okay in your head and think about and try and make it right. That I applaud any effort to do that. That's what I was saying. I was not kind of ordering people to go and do this or go and do that. So I apologize. I didn't mean to trigger people, but that's what I meant. Esprit Crusader, comment, I spent a lot of time in ethics for saying normal, everyday things.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do. And something you said yesterday would be right yesterday and wrong the next day. That's the scariest part.
Yeah. Or sometimes right in the morning and wrong by the evening.
Yep.
Daniel Chamberlain again, great comments from Danielle. Comment, when Ivas or Ivwas, I don't know who that is, was on the Apollo, LRH came off his motorbike and hurt his arm. We all know about it, and we were told we had to be quiet when he went in his environment. Nobody said he shouldn't talk about it. Yeah. There we go.
Well, that was a whole lot different when Quentin died, though. We were
How
ordered
so?
not to talk about it.
Really?
Yeah. We actually, there were rumors, and then they walked in and they told us, we had a special muster called, and they told us that he had died, and they told us, this is all you're going to know. If you say another word to anyone and you found out, you will be in ethics. Period. Then.
Yeah.
I didn't even research how he had died until last year. Yeah. I didn't go into how he had died because we were told not to ask questions. Yeah. And that was it. Period. The end. I found out about the GO involvement in the whole thing. I actually have a post on that I did on Tony's blog that's linked to in my website about Quentin's death, because I did not know. I was not allowed to talk about it. We were ordered not to.
Yeah. And that ordering happens at every level of the organization. You saying that has just reminded me of a story. I don't think I've told this publicly. At London Org, there was a lady who had joined staff, and I remember she just didn't show up to work one day, and everyone was like, where is she? Why is she not here? And, you know, it ended up being people being angry that she hasn't shown up to work and she's blown and whatever. And then we later find out that she had got involved in a crash. She was on her bike and she was in a road accident, and she very sadly lost her life. And we found out, but were very quickly told, stop asking questions. I was like, what, are we going to do a service? Have we phoned the family? What happened? Do we need to go visit her? Yeah, Alex, stop talking about it. I'm like, why? Because, I'm not trying to make people upset or sad, but we need to make sure we're there for the family, and, we're all grieving. We need to think about this and talk about it to each other. And they're like, no, it's en theta, Alex. Stop talking about it. It's happened. She's moved on to another body. End of. Don't talk about it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very, very sad. Office of Special Affairs says, thank you very kindly for your time, Valerie.
Hey, wait, you're the usurper. I was there before you. I was Gio.
And I want to end it on this comment because I wholeheartedly agree. It's a fantastic one to end on. Is Sue Denham, strong woman, Valerie.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I agree. And that's what I meant when I was saying earlier about making amends. I think now I've thought about what I meant by it was like, it's a sign of strength. You've come out of Scientology. You have to go through your own process of healing and figuring out what's going on in your own head before you can get to the point where you can do something about it. And it's a real sign of strength. Anyone that comes out and speaks publicly about this stuff at any level of the organization, and it's a real sign of strength and bravery on your part, Val.
It took me a lot of time. It's and I probably never would have. I want to make this clear to David Miscavige. It's his fault I spoke out. Because if he hadn't sicked people on me to try and recover me, I would have kept my mouth shut. I never would have said a word. So thank you, David Miscavige, for trying to recover me. I'm not coming back. I don't care if you put 7,000 websites against me. I will not be back, but I will keep talking.
I love it, Valerie. Thank you so much for joining me. Go and show Val some love. I'll put the link in the description for her blog. And thank you, everybody, for joining. And we'll be back very, very soon. Thank you so much, Val. I appreciate it.
See ya.